right, I think it's about time we get this started. All right, hello and welcome to a live stream. This is a live stream wherein I will be doing some web stuff. Turn off the music. I do like the music. I mean, this the track that was playing just now, I like it a lot, but it's sort of out of sync with my imagery because my imagery is like the serene waterfall loop, but that's pretty intense. Anyway, good afternoon. Welcome to a live stream. This is a live stream mainly intended for my students in DGST 101, which is a summer class at the University of Mary Washington. And in this live stream today, what I'm going to be doing is continuing what I worked on yesterday, which is the web layout, and I'm doing this to teach you how to do web layout stuff, and also just because I'm kind of interested in it, but I think it'll be useful. My intention is to try to get this more or less done today, and I don't think it'll take me that much longer. It'll just be kind of tedious in some cases because I'm going to have a bunch of images to put into place. But otherwise, I think it should be pretty. I'm going for a pretty minimalist layout, so I'm not going to be doing a ton of stuff to it. And I say that because if you're watching this, you're a student in my class, and you're trying to figure out something on your web page, then please ask, and I can try to demonstrate it here, and I would love to do that. The topic I'm continuing to investigate with the article I'm building is having to do with the color scheme in episodes of the TV show Loki, and I have not watched episode 6 yet. In fact, I'm going to watch it this afternoon with my kids, I think, after we're done with the stream. But I have extracted the images from it, and I've prepared some barcode visualizations, but I am trying to avoid spoilers, so I did not do the other things where you can combine them all together into a single frame, because I think you kind of end up having to look at the individual images when you do that, at least a little bit, and I'd rather, watch the show. So I'm going to do that later, but I thought it might be interesting actually to look at an episode I haven't seen and see what kind of conclusions I could draw from it by looking at it this way. And I can't really draw many conclusions, but a few observations actually come to mind by looking at the palette barcode. And so you remember, this is the top one is the most dominant color, which is a lot of black. But I think it's just because it's picking up the letterboxing kind of frames it with a black bar at the top and the bottom. That's part of it, but also just like it's a visually dark TV show. Like I have to watch it with all the lights off for me to even see what's going on. So I don't know what's going on there, but if I look at the second and third most popular colors, it does seem like there's a couple of pretty big shifts, right? So there's a lot of blue, and that really stands out, light blue. And then it's this kind of back and forth between like this yellow, and then there's like these orange stripes popping in here pretty strongly as well. And then at the end, it seems to be dominated by that sort of yellowish beige tone that really saturates the TVA part of the TV show. So it seems like that's probably where they're going to end up at the end. That's just a theory, of course. But it is kind of interesting to look at this view and try to make sense of it. Hello, Chosen Clown. Good to see you online. Thanks for watching. So this is what I'm working on the left. You can see my code from where I was the other day. And I guess I should go ahead and make sure that my login is still valid here, and it sort of is. So let me just make sure I can save changes. Okay, so I like to keep things organized, so the left side has my code I'm working on, and the right side has the output of it. So I'll go ahead and open up I'll get to the right folder here, and then look at the code, the HTML code here, and then I'll pull this up in a web browser. So it's practice.dgs101.net, and I think is it my web page, or no, it's project.html. There it is. Okay, so if you recall, what I did yesterday is I kind of built some content here. I showed several different little tweaks and things to kind of create HTML content. I'm using the lorem ipsum text for now because I haven't had time to actually write some thoughts. But it's that's good enough to try to figure out what things are supposed to look like. The major thing I did that is creating a lot of the look here is I installed the Spectre framework. And so I've got it here in these lines, 7, 8, and 9. And I'm using a CDN to load these. That's obviously one way to do it, but I think a better way to do it would be to manually install it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that next because that's going to give me more control over it, just in case for some reason the CDN goes down or it changes its path or something. I don't have to worry about that if I've already got it on my server. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as the first step. This is not going to change anything about the look. It's just a better way to do it. So I'm going to try to install it here. All right, so this is going to give me, it's going to give me a zip file to download. And yeah, that's fine. No, I don't need the source code. I just need, I just need the compiled code. Okay, it's in here though. You can't see it in the pop-up, but I'm going to go ahead and get it. Looks like I need, Spectre min, Spectre XP, and Spectre icons.min. Okay, that should be fine. Okay, so I'm going to download. I'm just going to extract the compiled CSS because I don't need anything else. I know you can't see what I'm doing here. I'm talking to myself as I do it. I'm just extracting files from that. Wait, I didn't want to extract all of them. Hang on. What did I do? I've been using this Windows computer for a while, but I still get frustrated trying to find things. Okay, so there's Spectre. Okay, so there it is. Oh, my disk is getting full. I need to move some things around. I have a big disk, but I haven't bothered putting things on the big disk. I can just have everything on my boot disk, which is conceivably risky. Anyway, okay, so I've got a bunch of files here. I guess I could show my desktop briefly, but it doesn't matter. I'm just going to show you them when I upload them. Because I have everything working in this folder right here, I'm going to just do a little bit of organization to make this make a little bit more sense. Inside of the folder of this web page that I'm building, I'm going to make a couple of subfolders. First of all, I'll make one called CSS, which is going to contain my CSS documents. And I'll make one called images as well, because I'm going to be doing several of those. I have one already, but I'm going to add a few more images today, so I thought it might be useful to put that in there. And I will go here to upload the CSS files that I just extracted. If you wanted to do it from the other way, then that's fine. What do I want? What do I want? Spectre min? Yeah, I'll get spectre.min. And unfortunately, this little interface only lets you do one file at a time, which is kind of a drag whenever you have a lot to upload. I'll just do it with all the minified ones. I don't need the full-size CSS. Okay, so that should be good. And now I'm going to go to my source code for the HTML and just change the path here. So right now it's a path that points to the web and it goes to unpackaged.com, and that loads it from a remote source, but I want to load it from a local source now. And in that case, I just need to type the path name to that CSS file. So I put those all in a folder called CSS within the folder I'm in right now. So this is a relative path name. If I start it with CSS, and then that CSS there, that's corresponding to like where I am right now /CSS. That's my file location, my file path. And I just need to get the file names. So I wanted to get spectre.min.css. And what else? Yeah, Spectre exp. Just copy and paste that. And Spectre icons. I don't think I'm using any icons, but it's nice to have them just in case I decide to. So I should save that source code, and then if I refresh the page, I shouldn't see any difference. And I don't, so good. I don't see any difference because it's still loading the same CSS. I just loaded it locally instead of remotely, and it's just a little bit safer to do it that way. Okay, so here's the article. I've been thinking a little bit about how to do this layout, and I don't know. I'm still sort of undecided. I'm gonna make my code a little bit smaller so that I can kind of look at the layout in a larger size and see if I still like it. This way, as I move little windows around here. This way I can see it a little bit better. I do want to do something with like a left and right layout, I think, because that gives like some text and then an image next to it, because I think that'll look pretty good. And I guess the question is which image, because most of my images are very wide. They're these barcode images, or they're the plot images, which are also kind of wider than they are tall. But I guess one of them could probably fit if I put it in a column kind of halfway, left and right here. Let's try it. So let's go to the source code, and what I'm going to try to do is put an image that appears alongside of and to the right of this paragraph. So to do this, there's a couple of steps you got to do, and this does get a little bit like wonky in terms of the code. You're going to end up with lots of kind of extra code, it'll look like, but hopefully it won't be too bad. So first of all, you've got to do the same thing you did up here, where I've got a div with the class equals columns, and then I contain that. Then that contains another div with all these special column class names that follow the schema from Spectre's grid system, which is what I'm working with here. And I just looked this up in the documentation. I don't know this stuff off the top of my head. But to do this again with in this case, we're going to try to divide this space into 2. So that means that we need to use the use the number 6 when we're talking about the size of the columns. So this is going to be the columns area, and I'm going to put one column here around the paragraph, and then I'm going to put another column around. I know that this image is kind of covering the other one. I'll just move that over there. And yeah, so I'm putting the other column. I'm going to put the image inside the other column. So I'm going to drag this, I'm going to drag this image tag and drop it in here. So now that is in that one. And I want to make sure, yeah, I've got all the closing divs I need because I've closed that one and I closed the container of that one. So this one closes the div class equals column. This one closes div class equals columns. Okay, so now I need to tell it how big to make these columns, and I'm going to go with call 6 for both of these and see how that looks. I think this is going to look really squeezed and imbalanced, but I'm going to try it. Okay, I mean, yeah, it kind of does. But I think I can fix it too. So I think I have an idea. So if you take a look at, you can see the layout kind of as it grows. I'm going to do 2 things to maybe make that look a little nicer. One of these is I'm going to increase the width of the overall column that contains all the text. I'm going to just go ahead and make that call 10. So there will still be a fair amount of padding left and right, but it fits the page a little bit better, especially at this size. I think that looks pretty good. And another, so you notice that there's a big white block down here now, this kind of empty space below the image, and I could fix that in probably 2 ways. One is I can add another image, or maybe make this image taller. Since this is dummy text though, the easiest thing really is just to delete some of this text, which is, it doesn't mean anything anyway. So this is why it's always better actually to work with real text, because then you know what you can delete and what you can't. But let's just chop some things off here. That looks like about the right spot. Okay, let's see how that looks. Yeah, there you go. That's better, I guess. It just, it's more balanced. It is still kind of awkward, I think, because that image is still so wide. It looks a little bit off, but I'm going to go with it for now. Okay, so I wonder a couple other things about this might be fun to try. I wonder if we can do I wonder if Spectre has a Jumbotron. Jumbotron is like Jumbotron is a bootstrap thing, and it's a way to make like a gigantic title for a web page. And I don't know if this one has it. It doesn't seem to. Maybe there's another name for it. Let me just see. I mean, because Spectre is so like minimalist, it might just not have that. I'm just kind of looking through what they call components to see if there's anything that might be similar. Oh, cards, those are kind of nice. Panels, those are cool. And Marvel themed in their documentation too. That's interesting. Toasts. Okay, I've never heard it called that before, but okay. And accordions, yeah, I don't really need any of those. Yeah, I don't really need any of those. I don't know where this timeline is. Oh, that's nice. Okay, so it does have a lot of nice components that I think could be useful, but... Oh, the hero. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, maybe I should do that. Hero is the word that I was thinking of instead of, like they call it a Jumbotron in other systems. But this is what I was talking about. Great. Okay, so we have hero small, hero large. Okay, let's do it around for my title. So the title of my argument, my paper thing I'm making here is Investigating Color Patterns in Loki. So let's make this into a hero instead of just a title. So we're going to do that this way by putting some text around it. I'm really just copying from this documentation. So it's these two divs, class equals hero BG gray and also hero body. And chosen clown just asked if there will be office hours today. I mean, there kind of always are. Like, you know, if you have a question, we can talk. I'm going to be grading, so I won't be like online in the office hours channel, just because I'm going to be recording videos. But if you see me with the green button, the green dot, you can get my attention that way, and I can hopefully respond. Okay, so that's good for there. But if you have a specific question, especially just if you can type it in Discord, I can always help that way. If it's that kind of thing. Sometimes I think with this kind of stuff, sometimes describing the problem is a big challenge. So if that's where you're stuck, then we can talk about it. All right, great. So investigating color patterns in Loki now has a much bigger presence on the page. It's pretty large. I kind of wish it would go full width, though. I kind of want it to not be constrained by this column. So I'm going to actually take this hero bit out of my columns and see how that looks. So I'm going to see if first of all, I'm going to try to keep it inside of the container. I don't remember what this is going to look like. Oh yeah, that's better, but I notice how it goes. It still leaves some padding. I really want this to go edge to edge. So I'm going to take this out of the container here. Okay. Yeah, there we go. So that's looking pretty good. Now I could do a couple of things to make this text of the title not appear so close to the edge. I feel like that's really bumping it pretty hard. I wonder, I can do two things. I can make it aligned center, which is one thing that titles often are, but I personally like a left aligned title. I'll show you both ways to do it in case you want to try this. So within the way I've written this, I do have this area to write my own CSS. It's not something that I'm using because I'm really relying on Spectre for almost everything so far, but of course I can write my own CSS here to tweak things. So if I want to, I'm going to go ahead and make a couple things here for the text. For the text of the H1 header to be in the center, I can use a property called text align and assign it the value center, and see what difference that makes. And there it goes. So that looks pretty good the way that is. I mean, that turned out to line up pretty nicely, but it's still going to be crowding the sides if the size of the window changes, as you see here. So that might be okay. It might not be a big enough issue to worry about. But I can change that actually by putting another, the same kind of column container thing that I did around the around everything else in this location inside the hero. I wonder if there might be an easier way to do it than what I'm thinking of, which is more of like a I'm wondering if I can combine divs, like if I can make the hero body also a container, and then. Or maybe even make it just columns. I wonder if I can do this. Yeah, I'm worried that it's going to need all three in a row, but I'm going to try it without. I wonder, what if I did? No, that wouldn't work. I was thinking, what if I made the H1 tag itself a column, but I don't think that'll work because I want it to go. Because the column contains and it needs to contain something. Okay, so column call 10, right? So this should make it line up with the left edge of the text in the article. But it didn't. Okay, so that's interesting, but not super surprising. Oh, well, you know what? Maybe the centering is still applying. Let me try turning off the centering. Maybe that's, yeah, no, okay. So the problem is I didn't, something didn't work right here. So maybe I do need to make it an additional div like that, like class equals container, and then div class equals columns. This seems like a lot of code, a lot of stuff doing things that are essentially redundant. Okay, well then move this into the middle and see how that changes things. No, it didn't change things. Okay, why not? Let me think. Oh, because of the offset. Right, because it's not call 10, it's call 10 mx. Right, that's right. It's with this bit here. This class will assign it what it needs in order to get into the center. Okay, so that's all right. So in that sense, I probably did not need this extra bit here. So let me rewind a little bit here. I'm going to take those divs back off and put columns back here. See how that looks. Yeah, there we go. So now they're lined up. They were a little bit off. But now the I here aligns with the I here, and that looks good to me. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now I could do a couple other things to make this look even fancier. I could make a background behind this image to make it look kind of, I think that would be pretty striking. I think I'll probably do that. In doing that, I probably want a bit more of a gap here because I feel like that H2 is really hugging the top there. So I'm going to probably move that around a little bit. I think actually moving it into the column would probably give it some more padding, and it makes sense to do that. Just conceptually, so let's see how that goes. No, that made it worse. What did I? No, because it still is trying to collapse that space. So let's put it back out. But I can do a couple things here to add some extra space. Probably. I'm just gonna tweak the layout with my own CSS. All right, so this div that I created that has the hero aspect and all the columns and stuff, that's just any old div. But I wanted to give it, let's see, yeah, it's got this special class hero. So when I want to refer to that div in CSS, I can refer to it by class name instead of by element name. So the H1, that's the element name, that's the selector there. I can use a different selector, which is going to be the element name, or the element class, which is hero, and you indicate that by using the period. So it's dot hero or period hero, and then I can add whatever other thing I need. And basically I want to add some more space between it and the thing below it. So that's a property called the margin. Margin has to do with the part of the block that you're looking at and the space between it and anything else next to it or above it and so on. So let's do margin. Let's do 2 REMs. See how that looks. That might be too much. Okay, so I did something wrong here. I gave it a margin of 2 rems instead of a margin that only applies to the bottom. So that added that space on the left and the right, which I don't want. Actually, also on the top. So I'm going to change my property here. That shouldn't be margin. That's just going to be margin bottom. So in this case, it's only going to apply my correction here, the 2 rems, to the bottom margin, which is what I wanted in the first place. So that, yeah, that looks a lot better. That gives it a lot of space, and everything's kind of back to normal. Cool. Okay, so let me make a couple other things. Let me put a background image behind the hero and see how that looks. I could also change some colors around, but let's try doing the background image. So let me put an image here. I think one of those some slice images would look pretty good as a background. So let me try doing that. I'll upload one of them here. Let's do S1. But actually I need to convert those first because ImageJ, when it creates them, it makes them as TIFF images, TIF, and those are great images for storing a lot of image data, but they actually don't work in a web browser. So I need to convert it first. Actually, I was going to do it on my own software, but to keep things fully in the web, I'll go ahead and do it on the web. I like using this website Cloud Convert whenever you have a file that's in the wrong format. It's a pretty good way to do it. So let's see how this goes with one of these images. Selecting the one right now. Let's do this one. And so this is the file that I produced yesterday using ImageJ. It's a TIF file, as you can see here, and I want to convert this to something else. I'm going to make this a JPEG. There's different settings of JPEGs, and you can adjust those here within Cloud Convert, but the default is usually fine, so I wouldn't worry about that unless there's something going wrong. Okay, so just should take a minute here. Not even a minute, probably. There it goes, it's ready. So now this is an image that is a JPEG image, and I can use this in my web layout. I need to download it first to my computer, because that's where I'm keeping all my stuff. And then I can upload it. Oops, I don't want to put it there, I want to put it there. So now I can upload it. Great, so there it is. Some frames, no credits.jpg. But I'm actually going to put this in the image folder instead of leaving it in the top level of this directory I'm working in, so that I can keep things a bit more organized, just like I am with the CSS. Now that I have that there, I'm going to use a CSS declaration to stick that into the background of the hero element that I created for my title. Oops, didn't want to make it that big. There we are. So let me try this. So to set a background image in CSS, the property that you're assigning is, as it says, background image. So in this case, what the background image wants is a path, a URL for the image that you want to appear there. And this is kind of similar to loading an image in an image tag. You need to know the location of the file you want to load. And if that file happens to be in the same folder that you're working in, then it's just the file name. If it's in a subdirectory of that folder, then it's that subdirectory's name and then the file name, which is what I have in this situation. So in this case, it's images / the whole title. So it's kind of long, so let me just copy and paste it to make sure I don't type it wrong, because if you type it wrong, it won't work. Okay, let's see how that looks. Oh, did something wrong. Okay, didn't work. Let me see. I don't think you need quotes there, but I'll add them there and see if that does what I wanted, and it's still not working. Okay, so when something doesn't work like this, there are a couple things we can do. We can try to figure out what it tried to do, and then see if there's something going on. I think I have a couple of theories, but I can learn about those theories by using the element inspector. So if you're using Chrome, you can right-click, and I know OBS isn't capturing the window that pops out, or the little options thing. But if I right-click it, then I can use the element inspector. I can go straight to that. So this is the part that I'm having a question about. So I'm going to right click it and then select inspect. This only works in Chrome, but there's a similar tool in Firefox. And I'm just looking at the code. I'm trying to figure out what the problem is, because it says it's not applying it. Oh, I wonder why. I wonder if this is it. That's it. Okay, interesting. So if you can see down here, let me make this bigger. This is the rendered CSS. So this is not what I wrote. This is what the web page understood, and that's different, right? The web page is not just doing what I tell it to do, but it's also listening to Spectre. And right here, Spectre and what I did got into a fight. In other words, CSS is all about properties and inheritances, and specificity matters. So the more specific you make a declaration, the more likely it is to work. And so sometimes getting CSS to work is kind of a game of trying to figure out how to be more specific or how to override something else. And it's an interesting challenge, but it can be a little frustrating. The element inspector helps a lot, because what it does is it shows me that this is the rule I wrote, background image, URL, blah, blah, blah. But it's got a line through it, which means that it's been superseded by something else. There's something else that is setting the actual background, and it happens to be right here. So this background with that color and then exclamation point important, that is the one that's actually being applied, and it is overruling the one that I wrote. So if I uncheck the box next to it, it'll disable what they wrote, and then it'll apply what I wrote. And that shows me that, yes, the image is in fact working, and there it is. So I'm going to do some other things to make that image look like more logical, but it's there right now. But let's see if we can make sure that it's going to work, because this change that I did right here was just a preview. This doesn't actually cause any difference to apply in the web page. So I need to come up with a different way of saying use this instead of this. And I could use the exclamation point important notation, I you know, it's discouraged. Like it's kind of a workaround, but you know, I mean, I'm not gonna go into I'm not gonna go into that. So I'm just gonna add important on mine and see if mine overrules it. It may not. Let's see. Okay, so that worked, I guess. So in this case now it kept both rules, but it applied mine first, which was the image. So okay, that worked. At least I think it did. Yeah. So that's one way to do it. That's kind of it's kind of kludgy, like it's kind of a duct tape solution, but it got the job done in this case. So I'm not gonna overthink it. Other ways you could do this would be to make this specifier, the element here, make the selector, right? I keep getting the words wrong, but I could make this selector more specific, and then it would probably work if I did something like add the BG image class to it, or if I don't know, if I made it have more parents to specify it. This is one way to do that, but I don't think that's that important because it's working. So I'm going to leave it the way it is. Keep it as simple as possible in terms of the writing. Okay, so this image is actually quite a lot bigger than what we can see on the page, and so in terms of what's showing up here, we're just seeing the top left corner of this image, and the part that I was actually hoping would be the background is more or less the middle, which is kind of over here. So there are some things you can do to change the size and orientation and other things about a background image using CSS. And this is a feature of CSS3, which is what we're up to right now. And I think CSS3 has been around since like 2006, but it still feels cutting edge to me. But I don't remember how to do it. So I'm going to. This is the kind of thing I don't do that often. So I thought, you know, this is what W3 Schools is for. So these are the ones I'm interested in. So background position is one of them that's going to be important, and also I also want to do background size, but they don't have that on this page. Maybe it's part of this. Okay, so let me just do the position first. Is it on this page? Okay, I just need to go through the chapters, I think. So the background image gives me the URL. Okay, I already did that. Background repeat. I don't want it to repeat, so I'm going to say no repeat. I just want one of it. Okay, background position. There we go. So I want this to be, I want this to be in the middle, really. So is it top or is it middle or center? Okay, middle turned green. That might be right. It might not be. Let's see if it makes the difference that we want it to. No, it didn't. Okay, so maybe center is what it wants. No, okay, maybe, I think I can just set this with size values. So let's try 50%. Huh, okay, so this isn't quite working. Let me see, maybe I should actually try it out in their thing. Okay, so their thing has background position is right top. Great, okay, so I could also probably say left top, right? Okay. Left middle is kind of what I want. Maybe it's too big. Maybe it's just like it needs. Maybe it's talking about like what is the origin of the image. Huh. Okay. Let me read on here. Background attachment. That's just going to make it scroll or not scroll, and I don't care for that. Okay, great. So I'm not sure why background size isn't covered in this, but oh, here it is. I mean, here's a reference to it. So let's see. Background size can be auto, or it can be different things. It can be cover, or it can be contain, or it can be something percentage based. So cover is going to be that it's going to make sure that the image is always big enough, and contain is going to make sure that the image always appears entirely. So let's try contain, because that's probably what I want. I do wonder if you can do contain horizontally but not vertically. I don't know. Let's find out. So let's do contain. See how contain looks. Okay, that's still not doing anything. It didn't change anything. Why isn't this changing anything? Okay, what about cover? Huh, okay, so sometimes when things happen like this where you think something's going to change and it doesn't, you have to kind of step back a little bit and think, am I actually doing what I think I'm doing? So I think I'm applying these rules, but maybe I'm not. Maybe these are being overridden as well. Let's take a look and see. Yeah, they are. Great. So that means that I need to keep applying the important thingy on all of these. So yeah, okay, that's kind of a bummer, but that's all right. So what we're going to do is change a couple of things so we don't have to keep adding the exclamation point important. I'm going to instead change the selector so that all of these rules will override something else. And this is kind of an old-fashioned trick, which I think will work. Oh, no, it didn't. Okay. Yeah, that's still not overruling. Still not overruling the important. Man. Okay. Maybe this is why using important is kind of a drag. Okay, so this is coming from the BG gray. I wonder if I just got rid of the BG gray, that would not whatever's left wouldn't be quite as important. Okay, yeah. So that's all. That's what I needed to do. Like, I don't need the background to be gray. I need it to be this image. So I've done it this way, and that should be good. So now I don't have to do the important, and also these two rules that I added are working. All right. So let's do background size. I don't know. I kind of want the middle part of the image and not the edges, if I can do that. So I wonder if I could make the background size something like, 120%. Okay, so that seems like it works, but now it's not in the right place. So let's try background position again. And now that I know that this rule will actually apply, let's see if it'll work. I want to say it's 50%. Like, I think that's how you address the middle, or one way to address it. So let's see if that works. Yeah, there we go. That's what I wanted. So now it's a nice, interesting but not super distracting pattern in the background, and you can still see my title pretty clearly. I might want to change that color, but that looks pretty good to me. You can still see a little bit of that sidebar stuff that I was trying to get rid of. So let's make the background size, a bit bigger, 160%. And there you go. So now it's back to that nice, interesting pattern, but it's not super distracting, and doesn't have any lines or edges within it. Okay, so that looks all right. I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, I don't know. Are there any questions? Anything you would like for me to show you how to do if you're working on your web page? I'm pausing to take a drink, so this is a good time to ask if you have any questions, or if you'd like me to explain what I just did in more detail. Well, seeing none, I'm going to move on to make a table to contain all of my images, and I think this is going to, this is going to be this is going to be kind of repetitive and redundant, and it'll take me a minute. But what I'm envisioning is literally a table with 6 columns, and then however many rows I need for each of the visualizations I've been creating. So the different barcodes, the plots, and then the averages, or the sum slices things. So those are going to need to be pretty small images on this page, but I also want to make it so that if you click on an image, it'll open that. If you click on a thumbnail, it'll open the full size of that image. If I wanted to get really fancy, I can make that a modal pop-up that just comes straight at you, comes out like a big pop-up but leaves you on the page. But just because I want to try to get this done in 20 minutes, I'm just going to make it take a link somewhere else. Probably, but now that I say that, I really want to try the modal thing. Maybe I should do the modal thing. That's going to be something, maybe, yeah, not this one, but the, what is it? Is it an element or a component? What do they call this? Yeah, they call it a modal. So a modal is something like this, where you click it and it pops up, and then you get to see it. Okay, so but the code for each modal is this. Like this would be a single one, and that's a lot of code for each of those images. And I'm talking about, 25 images now, so it'll be a lot of copying and pasting. And my code for this document is going to get a lot more, convoluted looking. But we will do it. All right, so. Oh, actually, maybe this is, no, okay, no, it does need to be pretty big. So let's take a look at this HTML structure. So there's one div that is called modal, and then I guess you have to say, oh, this is going to take some JavaScript. I don't want to deal with JavaScript. So that's fine. I mean, I can do that, but I don't want to right now. Yeah, it's going to be too much of a hassle. So I'll just do the old-fashioned way of making it a tiny image that links to the full size of the image. Okay, so let's get these images online. Okay, so let me go up here, and I'm going to end up with so many of these images. I really need to be thoughtful about my naming schema and my locations of things, so I don't get them confused with each other, especially because they look pretty similar to each other. So I'm going to make a sub directory for each episode, just to kind of help keep myself straight with these. So I'll do it following the same structure that I have on my computer, which is S1E1 for episode 1, just to, again, make sure that I keep things straight. I did not want to make a new file, I wanted to make a new folder. S1E2, S1E3, S1E4, S1E5, S1E6. Now I will do some uploading. You know what, before I do the uploading, I need to do some more file converting because I have all those TIFFs. So let me do that first. So let's do some more TIFFs. I did S1E1. Let's do 2. So this website, cloudconvert.com, it's free to use, but if you do it like I'm doing it right now, you will probably run into the limitations. There's a limited amount of conversion time that they make available to you if you are just using it for free. So oh wait, did I already do this as a JPEG? Sorry, I noticed when I was looking at the folder that it looks like I may already have that, at least episode 2, I may already have a, no. What? Oh no, because that's episode 1. It's saving it in the S1 folder. Then that's S1E1 folder, and I do already have that one because I did that a little while ago. Okay, so I'm just going to do these quickly. My naming schema confused me for a second there. So here's S3. Here's S4. And you could do these in a batch, but I'm doing them one at a time because when you do it in a batch, you're more likely to run into the limitations of the free account with Cloud Convert. And like, well, the account, like I'm not logged in right now, but what happens when you run into those limits is you can just log in, and you can actually make a free account, and then you can make multiple free accounts and usually get your processing done anyway. So this is episode 4. Did I not do episode 5 yet? Okay, I guess I don't have episode 5's. Yeah, okay, but that's all right. I can just kind of leave a spot for it. Okay, so I've got these now converted to JPEGs, so I can start uploading some things. Where am I? So I'm in E1 here, so let's upload all of the episode 1 files. So that's going to be the average, yeah, all the barcodes. Let's start with raw, average, palette, plot, and montage, and finally the sum. So yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 images per episode is what I'm working with here. So it's kind of a lot, but there they all are, and I've tried to name these pretty consistently across all these, except for the first one I did it twice, so I gave that one a special name. But let me, just now that I have these for consistency, let me name this the same thing. Oops. What? Come on. I'm trying to delete the extra period. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So looking at these images now, I can see that some of these are pretty big. So these are 84 kilobytes to almost 2 megabytes for this one. I wonder why that one's so much bigger. And then, yeah, the other ones are not huge, but they're big. They're going to be big whenever they're all here. Because if you think of, I'm going to have 36 images like this. So that ends up being a pretty big web page. So if you're looking at this on mobile data or something, it would take a minute for it to load. I want to avoid that. So I want to make it so whenever you're looking at the web page here, you don't have to load the full size image. You can just load the tiny thumbnail, which will be quite a bit smaller. So I need to convert these into a smaller version, basically. So I guess I can, yeah, I mean, I usually just do this manually in GIMP. I'm wondering if there's a way to batch convert it on Windows. I know how to do it on a Mac, but I don't know how to do it in Windows off the top of my head. So let's see what I can find if I Google. Convert images, Windows. Right? Not Google, but Windows. I mean, DuckDuckGo. So this is a Microsoft app. All right. Looks pretty basic and it's free, so maybe I'll go ahead and try it. I don't usually like using a app someone else made like this for something so simple, but I'll try it. And if it works, I'll pull up whatever interface it creates and then I'll show you that. Okay. All right, well, let me add that window to OBS so you can see it. Okay, so here's this image converter thing I just downloaded and have literally never heard of or used before, so I don't know if it's going to work or not. You know, we'll find out. So let's add some images. I just click the plus add images button, so I assume that's what I'm supposed to do. Let's see what we can do with this. So let's just do S1 first, and then I'll grab, I'm going to multi-select the images that I want. So these are the PNGs and the JPEG, and select all those. Okay, there's that. Now for the output, I guess I need to choose a folder to put this in. So let me put it in same place I was just now, the Loki folder, S1, E1. Okay, but that's the same folder where I am right now. So I'm going to make a new folder just in case it doesn't do anything with the file name. So this is the same folder I was in, Loki, S1E1, but then I made a TN folder for these to make thumbnails, hopefully. So let's see if this will work. So output format JPEG is fine. Configure resizing. Okay, so downsize to fit a particular width. Yeah, that's a good idea. So let me make it 120. That should be good. And I can do all of them at once, I guess, but this will be a good test. Okay, is it done? That was quick. It says it's done. Let me see what the result is. Okay, the result is good. There are 6 very small images now. Except something happened. Oh, I forgot. So the plot image is a PNG because it has a transparent background. And so that one looks weird because it actually created a black background to make it a JPEG. JPEGs don't have transparency, so that's why. So I'm gonna redo these. I'm gonna make these as PNGs, and that'll be better. Okay, hopefully that preserves the transparency, and it did. Good. So I know you can't see it, but that's what happened back here. So let me delete the extra ones, and then I will upload these, stick them in here. And then we'll be good to go with the first part of the table. All right, where am I? So I don't need this for now. Let me get the converter out of the way and go back to the file manager. So here I am, and these are my full-size images, right? But I'm going to upload my TN images. And I'm going to rename these TN thumbnail images so I don't get them confused, because they did actually generate and they kept the same name. So I'm going to rename these all so they have _TN after the main part of their name, just so I know at a glance which one is which without having to open it or check the file size. I wish that converter software that I used gave me that choice, but it didn't. At least I didn't see it, so. Wait, where's that? Just, okay, converted all those, so let me upload them now. Yeah, and here again, it would be great if I could do this, you know, in a batch upload, but you can't. The only thing you can kind of do is you can upload a zip of all of your files, and then you can unzip them once they are uploaded, which is sort of faster if you have a bunch of files, but in this case, it's actually probably faster just to click through them all. And so, okay, so now they're all uploaded here. I've got a group of files, and you can see that some of these are something.png, and then some of these are something_.png. My some frames is a JPEG, but everything else is PNGs. So I need to remember that when I put that into my HTML code, but otherwise this is looking okay. Now I'm going to put a table here, and I'm going to put the table just at the bottom of these paragraphs, just because. And now I'll put it up higher just so we can see it more easily. I'll put it here in the under the data heading, but it doesn't really matter. So a table is an important structural element in HTML because it lets you organize and structure your data. Back in the olden times, we used to use tables for layout because there was not an easier way, but especially with an elegant grid system like Spectre, there's no reason to do that. But also it's semantically incorrect because a table is tabular data. A table isn't layout information. It's things that are meant to go together in rows and columns to be meaningful. So that's what I have in this case. I have a table that I want to create of all these visualizations to organize them all and kind of very clearly show you what they are. So typing, it's going to take a lot of typing to create an HTML table that will actually work. If you want to know how to make a table, W3 Schools I'm sure has a good tutorial that they always do. But basically a table has different components, and the main components that you have for a table are table rows, and then within each row you have table data cells. And the number of data cells in each row should be the same if you want to have a consistent number of columns. In this case, I'm going to have 6 episodes total, but I'm going to also need another column to explain what is in each row. So I'm going to need 7 TD table data cells in each table row that I create. So I'm also going to need a header row. I'm kind of waving around with my hands as I describe this because I'm visualizing it in my head. I'm going to need a header row to say which episode has for each of those. And then I'm going to need the data in each of those cells. This will probably end up looking kind of squeezed into my layout as I've got it, but I'm going to try it, just see how it goes, and then I can adjust the overall look of it later. All right, so I'm going to give it, I'm going to do a T head and a T body for the different parts of it. So I can do up here in the T head, I'm going to create 1 row, so TR is 1 row, and then I'm going to create, like I said, 7 columns, and each of those is, or 7 cells. And actually this is a header, so I'm going to use TH instead of TD for these. So that'll, oops. I'm going to make these all line up visually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so then I'm just going to do it like this, episode 1, or maybe I'll just, yeah, we'll just do it that way, because I'm going to need enough space for this. I wonder if this supports multiple cursors. Oh, it does. Oh, this is cool. Okay, sometimes in a text editor, you can multiply your cursor. So I'm holding down the control key and then clicking, and you can see the blinking cursor is actually multiplying. So now I don't have to keep switching to a new row to type the episode, the word. Of course, I could copy and paste the word episode, but like this, I can actually type in 4 places at once with that little trick. Not every editor will support that, but this one does, and I'm pleased. And then there's the numbers. But that's it's a cool trick. Whenever you have to do something that's really repetitive, then sometimes little tricks like that can actually save you some time and just make it seem like less of a drag. So, all right, so I've got that in there now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make the full structure for this table and then put data in it because I think that'll be easier to go. All right, so after that header row, I'm going to have 1 row for, well, a row for each of these things, right? So, but each one of these, now I'm just going to copy and paste in this case. Wish it wouldn't jump me back there. I want to go down here. Come on. Wish it would not. It's trying to help me out with the indentation, but I don't want to go there. I want to go here. All right, so that's 6. I need 1 more. There we go. So that's 7 columns for the second row. And now that I have this pattern of these TRs and these TDs, I can just copy and paste this multiple times to make multiple rows. I wasn't even counting. If I end up having too many, I can always delete it. But that's what we need to make those rows have that structure. And this should actually work. Now I should be able to take a look at it and see how it looks. There's nothing in it other than that first row, but at least I should be able to confirm that I haven't made any massive errors here. Okay, so save and then refresh. Right page, see if that looks like anything yet. Okay, it doesn't because there's nothing here, but that's the beginning of it, right? I'm starting to see it. I wonder if Spectre has any neat little tricks for tables. Sometimes they might include a little some special classes to make it look a little bit nicer and cleaner, and it looks like they do. So it looks like it just needs a class table. Oh, we can make striped tables too. Hoverable? What does hoverable mean? Oh, and yeah, scrollable tables. That actually might be really helpful too. So these are things that are provided by Spectre. Let's just do the basic one, table, and that should be good enough, at least to see how it looks. And then we can come back and try something more fancy once we have the data in there. So okay, so that already looks more like a table. Great. So let's figure out what each of those rows is going to be. So let's first of all start with the barcode, and then the second one we should make the average colors, I guess. The next one was color palettes, then the montage, and then the plot, and finally the sum slices projection. Okay, so it looks like I have more rows than I need, but that's okay. We'll leave them there for now just in case. Okay, so there's those labels that I created, and you can see that this is distributing these things evenly across this, and I'm going to start sticking some images in here to see how that goes. I think it's already looking kind of squeezed, or looking like it will be squeezed once I start putting stuff in here, but that's okay. We can deal with that if we have to. Now this part is pretty straightforward at this point. I need to put some images in. Okay, so I just saw chosen cloud. You just asked a question. It's let's see if I can answer it. So you have a map that's tangled together. Can you untangle it? Yes. So it's something I might need to look at to see how to do it. But a couple of things. There is a way to make your map static, so like the different elements, like the circles, aren't bouncing around randomly. There's a way that you can actually just drag them and put them in a place, and they'll stay there. So that's one thing to look into. It's dynamic versus static layout. That's an option you can change in the decorate part of your editor. So try that. And then the other thing you can do is you can do different kinds of network analysis to kind of make it dynamic, but have like centers of importance or not. And you can change how those different weighting factors increase or decrease the attraction between different elements, and then that might make it look less tangly if you make them like repel each other instead of attract each other. And those are things you can adjust in the decorate part of it. So let me just I'll see if I can show you an example. Yeah, I'm still getting that weird error from this, but this is my pretty convoluted map of a hypertext novel, and it's just the names are just the names of each position in here. And I think I've got this one actually set to be static, so at least well, maybe it is. Maybe not. Huh, things are kind of moving, kind of not. I don't know what I did. Let's see what I did here. It's been a while since I've worked on this one. Okay, so let me switch to the basic editor. You can size by any. You can do a lot here, but you've got a lot of options, and you can like learn about these different options in here. I wonder how I did. I'm trying to see how I did the static thing. I think this static is the word they use, or maybe fixed. Let's see, maybe it's just one of the settings in here. Connection. Maybe it's just a preset. Or hairball. Let's try changing these. What happened there? No, it didn't really. About auto? Yeah, these settings aren't really changing anything. I wonder if it's because this is something to do with the way I created this map. I wonder if I've made it so that each of these just has a fixed position. It might. Yeah, I don't know what that. We saw that thing about pinning it in place. That's the terminology. So maybe I did go through and pin all these at one point, and that's why they're moving when I click on them. Yeah, it is actually. I'm seeing here. This one's pinned. Yeah, the little icon there that says pin, that's pinned in place. So that's probably what you need to do. Like you might have to do it manually, but now that one's unpinned, you should see it wobble related to others, although you're not. It repinned itself. Every time I click to move it, it seems to pin it. So you might find that happens if you do yours. If you just start messing with them by clicking and moving them around into different positions, that might, make it work for you. I don't know. Yeah, so that's not, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I would start looking into, is trying to pin things in place. Or you can do different things with network analysis to make certain things have values that you can use to assign size, which is what I've done here. So like this one, has a number of connections to it, and then I've decorated it by saying that it should be, I'm sizing this by degree, which is the number of connections. So if it's going to automatically compute that for each of these and then adjust the size accordingly. So I don't even need to know what it actually is. But if you look at it, you can see the number here. When I click on this one, S32, the computed degree is 6. And so that's going to be bigger than one where the computed degree is 4. And these numbers, the degree 4, that came from, that field just appeared there when I ran the network analysis, which down in the bottom right, you can see the metrics thing. It's like a little sort of chemistry beaker thing, and if you do social network analysis, you get these different metrics you can try to generate. So if you wanted to do that one, you would do degree, and then you click the button and it just runs that computation to figure these all out. And then it gives you a field that you can use in sizing and also coloring and other things. So yeah, hopefully that helps. There's a lot you can do with Kumu, right? I mean, a lot of people just kind of scratch the surface with it, but you can really do some really elegant layouts and also really rich. I mean, for each of these elements, you can make it have an image, like you can put a picture behind it. That would be cool. You can also make the connections have different colors if there are different kinds of connections. Like these are all just basic connections, but I was looking at somebody's yesterday, and there's like different kind of relationship connections. So like these two people are friends, so that's one connection type. Other people are dating, so that's a different connection type. You can make the connections have different colors and line types depending on those different connection types. And that's something you can do with the styling if you go over here to the right and start playing around with those options. So that's yeah, so plenty to play with there. I hope you all have have some fun digging into that. But I'm going to go back to my table. I want to at least get the first column and do that. So actually, yeah, no, it's not related to Twitter, although you can use it for Twitter or something. It just literally means like, what is the social structure here? If you imagine this as people, and really the word social network, like we kind of use that to mean, Facebook, Twitter, blah, blah, blah. Really, those are social media platforms. The word social network, exists before that stuff, and we think of just like the group of people that you know and that you're related to and that you socialize with. That's your social network, and that's a thing that has existed. It's just that Facebook is a company that's based on commodifying that and making that their business, but that's not necessarily the case for that concept. And so that's what's going on there. A cricket just flew over here. Okay. So I'm gonna go back to my table. I'm gonna at least get that first column done, and then I'll wrap it up because I actually want to go watch this episode, and maybe I can do that. Okay, so I've got these images here, and they're in my file manager. They're in this location, and they all have this same pattern. So I'm just gonna stick them in here for the barcode column. I'll do that one first because I'm here, and it's an image tag, which I did yesterday or the other day. So you should remember this. I just have the source attribute. And I'm going to do the location for that one, which was in images, S1E1, which is the episode I'm on right now. And then we'll do barcode raw first. And then I'm not going to do the width and height. I'll just let it figure that out. Although I really should. Yeah, I am. I'm going to do the width and height. Sorry. Let me figure out what that actually is. So for this barcode raw, I know it's 120 wide because that's what I set it to when I generated it, but I don't know what the width is. The height. So the height is 51. So it's 120 by 51. So that's good. 120. Height equals 51. Alt equals barcode image from. There you go. So that should be good enough for that image, and good enough to check to make sure that it works. And if it works, I should just be able to copy and paste that same pattern and just change the file names for each of them. So there it is, except I loaded the wrong one. You can see that it's actually, I forgot to add the TN part. So that's actually the full size image, but squished down to that size. So let me load the actual small image now by correcting that file name, and now it appears correctly. So there's episode 1E1, very small, but what are you gonna do? All right, so I'm going to copy and paste this image tag because every other image tag after this is going to be very similar, except the file name will be different. So here's the average one. So now it's not barcode raw, it's barcode average. And I'm going to say averaged colors. Save those changes, refresh, and there we go. You know, I think I can make the color palette visualization look cooler than it does, but it's all right. So there's the, so now I'm in the color palettes one. So again, just need to change that. Here's the montage. Just need to change this one. Here's the plot. Was it hue plot? I think that's right. Okay, now I got the color palette one wrong. What did I do? So it's not palettes, it's palette. Right? Yeah, there you go. And also I need to correct the size because the montage is actually, and the montage and the plot are different dimensions. So the montage, I can see here, this one is 59 pixels high, so I need to correct that. And then the yeah, and then the plot image is, let's see, 90. So I need to make those look right. Make that adjustment. Okay, there you go. And then finally the slices, the Z projection. This one, I should also need to check the size of this one. I know it's 120 wide, but I don't know the height. So the height on this one, if I can get it, is 67. So 67, and that file name is someframes.jpg, right? 'Cause this is the one JPEG here. Is that capital sum? Yeah. Is the thumbnail? No, the thumbnail is a PNG. That's confusing the way I did that. But as long as you double check and get the names right both places, it doesn't matter. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And you can imagine, you know, the rest of this filled in. I haven't done all of the visualizations for episode 6 yet because I haven't seen it yet and I didn't want to spoil it. But it would basically just be filling this in. So to go to the second column, if I, you know, I'm not going to go through the whole process of making those thumbnails again, but for episode 2, I would simply put them in the next set of TD places. So episode 2 barcode would go here, episode 2 average color would go here, episode 2 color palettes would go here. You see I'm scrolling down. Episode 2 montage would go here, the hue plot would go here, and then the slices projection would go down here. So that, you know, then that's episode 2, and then likewise you would continue through all that. You know, looking at all this, I think it would also be interesting to look at each of them sort of in a closer comparison. So something like, I can imagine all the barcodes sort of stacked on each other. I think that would be kind of a nice composite image to look at to really get a sense of what the differences are between these. That's a good next step. Oh yeah, I wanted to make links to these too, didn't I? So let me just do one of those to show you the process, and then I'm going to wrap it up. So a link is done with a tag called A. It's the letter A, and the attribute href determines the target for that link. It's going to be whatever the link is to. In this case, I want to link to this image, like not the thumbnail, but the one that is the full-size barcode for this episode. So that is barcode raw.png, and the A tag opens and closes. I just need to put it opening before the image tag opens and closing after the image tag closes. And then I'm going to add a special little attribute here called target. And if you do target and then equals and then underscore blank, that will make sure that the link opens in a new window, which is what I want in this case. So that should be it for episode 1 barcode. So let's try it. So you can see it's a link now. And if I click it, yeah, there's the full-size image. It'll open it in another tab, so I can view it at my leisure. It would be nice in a way to have that pop out, but this is actually maybe better because you can see it at full size. If I did pop it out, it would still be shrunk quite a bit because of the layout of this web page. But overall, I think that's fine too. Anyway. All right, so that is that full-size barcode. And it's the same process for all these. I'll just do it one more time, just to make it clear. I'll do it for the sum one because that was the kind of stranger one. Again, just the A tag opens and closes, and href just needs to be the file name that I want to appear here. In this case, it's going to be some frames.jpg because that's the JPEG one, and then just target equals blank underscore blank. Okay. Yeah, there you go. It's very big. All right. Okay, I think that's probably good enough. I've gone for over an hour. It's a good time to stop and take a break. So I hope that was helpful. I mean, I kind of went pretty far in this demo, and I don't know if you came with me or not, or who's coming with me at this point. But my hope is to kind of show you what's possible with a few tools. The thing that I did that's different this time that I don't usually do is I added this whole idea of a CSS framework, but I think that adds so much elegance to your website. Like, it can add a lot of those little details that you don't even notice about most web pages, and just adding that Spectre framework can really go a long way. There are lots of other frameworks, like I mentioned. I just happen to like Spectre because it's lightweight and I kind of am used to using it. So Spectre's a good one. Bootstrap is a great one too. And you're certainly welcome to use all or any of those. They come with good documentation in most cases, so you can really just kind of follow the directions. Of course, you have to know what they're talking about. You have to understand the vocabulary. So those tutorials in Codecademy and Deborah 3 Schools can hopefully get you that if that's something you want to try. Okay, so I think I'll wrap it up. Thanks for watching. If anyone still is, I don't have my dashboard pulled up, but if anyone's still watching, thanks. I'm going to wrap things up here. I will be talking to you all again next week because next week is the last week of class. So I will be streaming on Monday, probably just Monday and Tuesday of next week, and that'll wrap it up because I think technically that's the end of the semester. So look forward to that, I guess. And if you have questions with anything, please let me know or send me messages. I will be, I'll send an announcement about this too because I know hardly anyone's watching, but I will be I will be traveling this weekend. I will be camping, so I might not have cell service. So I will do my best to help you via mobile data if I can, but I probably won't be able to respond very quickly or very thoroughly if you do get my if I am able to communicate at all. So I will be kind of back online, ready to go with that on Sunday evening probably. So hopefully you all can do okay, without me, and yeah, you'll be fine. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm going to switch to the outro scene and wish you all a good day. So bye. Where's my music? Trying to find my music.
Are you able to